Well, welcome everybody to this session on the new paradigm and ways of operating in Asia and around the globe. My name is Ursula Weinhoven. I'm the Director and Representative of the International Telecommunication Union at the United Nations in New York, and it's such a pleasure to be here at PTC'DC and with you and this fantastic panel that we're going to hear from shortly, and this really exciting, I think one great way to describe it is really a case study on the how we can be ambitious and help address the digital divide. And I've had the benefit of chatting with each of the speakers beforehand, and I know they have so much to share. So we're going to actually start by asking each of our esteemed panelists just to give a 1-minute introduction of themselves before we turn to the session topic itself. So perhaps I can start here, Ivan.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ursula, for having us on board. So I'm Ivan Fong from Amalgamated Telecom Holdings in Fiji. We started and are based out of Fiji with Telecom Fiji, Fintel, and Vodafone Fiji in the last, I think, 10 years or so. We've been doing quite a bit of work in the Pacific. You'd know us better as Vodafone, because that's the brand we use in the markets we move into. So we've been doing a lot of work in Kiribati, Samoa, American Samoa, the Cook Islands, Vanuatu, and the latest project we got up and running last year was in Papua New Guinea, where I think as of now, 1 year since launch, we're up to close to 1 million customers and about 800 sites in Papua New Guinea. Quite a lot of that network was built during COVID, which is quite a challenge to get up and running. And one of the things in many of the markets where we operate in, the hurdle we get, because we do a lot of the last or first mile, depending on the way you see it, is you need to connect to the rest of the world because it's all internet and data now. And that's where some of the hurdles are. So, this talk would be a great one to explore what we can do.
Fantastic. You've got so much to bring. Simon, let's turn to you for your brief intro of yourself.
Yeah, Simon Parker. I'm head of strategic projects at the Vocus Group. We're a large network infrastructure provider headquartered in Australia. We've got a pretty large terrestrial fibre footprint in Australia that serves a whole range of customers, government, enterprise. The large global hyperscalers use our network. Increasingly, low Earth orbit satellite providers like Starlink and Amazon Kuiper also use our system. We have been a developer of fibre optic subsea systems in the past. We've built out networks between Australia and Singapore and Indonesia, and we've just completed a network build between Timor-Leste and Australia. So we've certainly we've tried our hand at cable subsea development. Really interested to talk to everyone today about this new paradigm, which is the discussion for this particular panel, and how we, as private carriers, can leverage off the huge investment that players like Google are making.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Simon. Brian, over to you. A brief introduction.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Quigley. I am an engineer at Google, and I have responsibility for the planning, design, and construction of our terrestrial and subsea networks globally. Thanks for attending.
Thanks, Brian. Rory, last but not least, for sure.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rory Stasko. I'm the CEO of Telstra International. So in our world, that's everything outside of Australia. Effectively, and very relevant for this conference, there's two components to that. One is the Digicel Pacific businesses, which we compete in a very similar market to Ivan and the team across the Pacific Islands. And then second to that is, obviously, we operate a very large Transpacific and intra-Asia digital infrastructure network through subsea terrestrial cable landing stations, earth landing stations. So very excited to be here. Thank you all for joining.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Rory. So as you can see, we've really got a fantastic panel assembled, and they're very well placed to share their insights in this session. So this digital and technological divide is just no longer acceptable. It's so urgent, and we need to raise our ambition. And that's, I think, great context for this really ambitious initiative that we're going to hear about. So, Brian, over to you. Can you please introduce us all to this collaboration that Google's been working on with partners? including those on the stage in the Pacific. What is Pacific Connect? And what's new about this model and collaboration? And where are we at?
Yes, thank you. So 2 years ago, September 22, I had the honor of attending the Pacific Island Forum Summit in Washington, D.C. And I went there thinking I had the Google playbook on how do you build infrastructure. And sure, we can solve Pacific Island. We've done this all over the world. And it became really, really apparent that the playbook didn't work. And the Pacific Island Forum is 18 countries. 15 of them don't even meet the standard as having broadband connectivity at all. So in the United States, we have this magic number of 100 milliseconds. Can you reach an internet peering point within 100 milliseconds round trip? And if you can't, you're not even considered as having broadband. And there's all types of funding that help build out the United States for places that don't. 15 of the countries don't meet that. Several of the countries are over 800 milliseconds. And this became really obvious for me when, as a I don't know, I'll say ignorant engineer, suggested to one of the Pacific Island leaders, yeah, this is great. We're building a subsea cable from Australia to the US. Let's jump on a video call next week and see if we can connect your country. Well, little did I know that leader flew to Fiji to check into a hotel to have the bandwidth to have a video call with me. It was mind-blowing to me, who just has video calls with my kids all the time on the phone, that there's entire countries that have to take a flight to get on a video call. So I needed to learn, and I packed my bags and started going on a trip. And the first place I visited was Fiji. And I was amazed to learn not only how much of their electricity is hydro-produced, but the cost of power is cheaper than what I pay for my home in California, 19 cents a kilowatt hour. It was amazing. I didn't think it was possible. Then went over to French Polynesia, and yes, it's a tough life going to Tahiti and Fiji and visiting these places, but I went on a tour of a hospital where 50% of the power, which is used for air conditioning, uses deep seawater cooling. So they take the water from the deepest part of the ocean, they use that to cool the hospital, and then they put it back. It's called SWAC, seawater air conditioning. We put this on the back of the Equiano cable that we built from Portugal to South Africa, and there was a public-private partnership between Google, a nonprofit in St. Helena, which is a small island, a UK territory in the middle of the Atlantic, 5,700 people. Shore, which is the incumbent carrier, and the EU Development Bank to build the first branch to St. Helena, the first submarine connectivity to the island. So in Google 10X thinking, okay, well, we did this for one place. Why can't we do it for all the Pacific Island countries? So we came up with a concept of Pacific Connect, but it came very, very clear that this was bigger than Google. We couldn't solve it alone. It needed to be public, private, and carrier partnerships. So we met with strategic carriers in the region, whether that's Vodafone, that has roughly half of the islands for mobile service, and Digicel, Telstra company, that has the other half, and said, how can we work together to look at this connectivity? We approached Vocus, a wholesale carrier that is a strategic partner in Australia and is very interested in US to Australia connectivity. How can we bring them in? Then we approached the Fijian government and the French Polynesian government as sort of two anchor tenants and leaders within the forum. And we're able to meet with the Australians and the US. And ultimately, we have this amazing program that I'm just humbled that all of you are here to allow us to talk about it today, where the United States, the Australian, the Japanese, New Zealand governments, the Chilean governments have all provided funding to reduce the digital divide, whether that's purchasing a branching unit to allow a country to connect in the future, or a full spur connecting places that quite frankly, don't have submarine connectivity today. So Pacific Connect is not a Google project. It's a multi-stakeholder initiative across multiple carriers, multiple governments, even multiple content providers that creates 3 new rings in the Pacific: South Pacific, Central Pacific, and North Pacific. South Pacific you can think of as Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, French Polynesia, which allows you to connect Cook Islands, Samoa, American Samoa, Tonga, Niue, Vanuatu, and New Caledonia. Central Pacific, which is a second ring going between the Marianas to Fiji and French Polynesia that allows you to connect Kiribati, Marshall, FSM, Nauru, PNG, and Solomon. And then the North Pacific ring, which goes from Japan to Hawaii to Guam. So think of 3 very, very large rings going across the Pacific. And then across those 4 nodes, Hawaii, Marianas, French Polynesia, and Fiji, they have multiple connections to different continents: South America, Australia, the United States, and Japan. So it's a really large collaborative program that is focused on improving internet access in the Pacific. And all of us are participants in that, and it really creates a new model for how can you capitalize the investments of private enterprise to connect the unconnected.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brian. We're going to come back to you. We're going to turn to Rory now. We just heard how Telstra's involved in Pacific Connect, and you can elaborate on that for us. And of course, there's also the example of Telstra's acquisition of Digicel Pacific with support from the Australian government. So lots of experience there about public-private sector partnerships to improve regional digital infrastructure. Can you share some lessons or learnings from your experiences in collaborating with this new investment model?
Yeah, I love Brian's setup there, because it is about how the industry from different perspectives come together to provide connectivity. And again, it's not just about connectivity for connectivity's sake, it's about the end use cases for consumers to be connected to bridge that divide. I think as we look at the Pacific more broadly, it's also a combination of where do we take commercial interests and investment that has a commercial return, and then how do we use various parties to help protect on some of the risk, help bring connectivity where we might not have the investment appetite for some of the returns to be able to support that in a way. And I think that's where government comes in and plays an important role. I think as Brian talked about, the way that various governments come in to play a role as we look at the Pacific Islands and their support of that is an extremely important part to make, to help make this happen in many ways. There's a lot of complicated parts which money doesn't always solve. How do you land a cable in a particular market? How do you manage the regulations? That's where actually many of us come to play, because we have experience in those markets, and we have experience in the regulatory environment. We have experience in the engineering of how to design it properly. And so I think it is the combination of that. I think in Telstra's example, we had a partnership that sort of came to fruition about 2 years ago in June 22 with the acquisition of Digicel Pacific. That was a joint partnership with the Australian government, but was ultimately funded through Export Finance Australia, through the DFC, through JBIC, as a joint quad funding model, if you will, that was principally led by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade out of Australia. And in that example, it allowed us to acquire Digicel Pacific with the support of the Australian government, with that focus and that objective about how do we continue to provide connectivity? How do we continue to serve underserved communities? I think Digicel's mantra has been over the last 15, 20 years, very similar to ATH in many ways, but how do we connect the unconnected? How do we continue to provide those services? And there's a last mile aspect of that, and where funding has allowed us to continue to invest in towers to reach customers that haven't been covered before. It's quite, if you look at Papua New Guinea, it's one of the few markets in the world where mobile penetration is still sort of in the 30-40% rate. It's unbelievable. I mean, you think most countries around the world, we're talking about 200-300% penetration in some places. And you find a market where you still have actually unconnected individuals in these communities. And as what we've seen is, as you provide that connectivity, as we get the last mile there, the use cases start out relatively basic, but over time they grow, and they grow quickly. And so you see the demand for data, the demand for, latency, the demand for the ability to make a video call, the ability to stream, education, to stream sports, increasingly important. And so the way that we've been able to partner with the Australian government to do that has been really interesting. I think one of the key lessons through that was probably not telling anybody anything they don't know. Hyperscalers move at a speed, operators move at a speed, government moves at a speed. We all move at different speeds, and our stakeholder groups, our process for approvals and for decision making is different. And I think one of the important parts of that journey was understanding our stakeholders and our partners about the process that they need to go through. And for us to learn about how we move at a pace that works with them. And similarly, how do they learn about how we operate? And so I think it's easy to say, well, we can't work with so-and-so because they aren't going to move at our pace. It was a little bit of a learning for us. And as we went through that, the more understanding we had, the more collaboration, the more transparency, the more we were able to sync up how we operated. And so now I'm incredibly proud of the partnership that we have with the Australian government and Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in terms of that sync, in terms of how we look at that investment opportunity, how we align our interests, and how we continue to do that. That is very much a commercially driven enterprise, but it is with a public-private partnership. And I think it's incredibly important as we look at that, about how do we build more models like that. But it takes a little bit of learning and changing the way we operate at times to be able to accommodate and to really sync up with our partners well.
Thanks so much, Rory. Ivan, turning to you, how is ATH engaged in this new model of collaboration? And what's your perspective, among other things, on what the benefits are, will be, and could be?
Right. I think to start off with the benefits, as I said earlier, we build the first or last mile networks, and we need connectivity. The great thing with something like what Brian is doing is, as Bill said and Ambassador Fig said this morning, they're doing it because they have a commercial need to do it. But, for whatever reason, they're sort of running across your front door. And there's an opportunity for all these markets to connect to solve one of the key challenges we have, which is getting reliable, affordable bandwidth to the end users at the end of the day. And I see that's where the opportunity is. There's 15 or 18 markets. Many of them are connected with fiber, but each of them could have better connectivity and more reliable connectivity. I know we spoke. The Pacific Forum happened in Tonga last week, and in the midst of that, I think they have 2 cables out there, but the earthquake damaged, a cable again. So you can never have enough options for connectivity, and that's the part of the world we live in where it's mainly natural disasters are quite disruptive to the economies. So just being able to shore up, that piece of the puzzle could help quite significantly. The other thing, I think more to what Rory was saying is, yes, we do compete with Digicel, but I think the ATH group in the Pacific is also Telstra's largest customer, and we have quite a few partnerships with Telstra as well. So we do recognize that there's areas we have common interests and we collaborate in. We've had a look at, for some of the markets individually, the stats you quoted. Many of the Pacific markets have a GDP per capita of maybe less than $3,000 per year. If you take, the UN sort of gauge of affordability at 1 or 2% of that to your monthly spend, it's about a $2.50 to $5, index for what's affordable broadband in that part of the world. So that's the kind of puzzle we have to solve. And, when you run that across all the markets, for quite a few of them, it's immediately obvious that no single, player can do that alone. You sort of, have to look across the table, talk to the other partners and say, look, the opportunity is here, the boat's sailing, and you don't know when the next boat is going to come. If you miss this one, it might be a lifetime before you get another chance. So while, the opportunity is there, let's go for it and make a run and see what we can actually do out of it. So for us, that's one of the objectives. I think the example I give to, sometimes the numbers don't work, but maybe out of a leap of faith, you do it anyway. I mean, I remember a year when I think Vince Cerf was going to an internet governance meeting in Kiribati, and he firsthand saw the challenges out in Kiribati, where just like Tuvalu, when we were looking at that market, you couldn't set up a phone call to have a meeting and not have to redial in 10 times to get that to work. It's better today, but they still don't have cable in Tarawa. I think they have a cable coming in next year. We look forward to seeing what else that can bring in terms of development in that market. But we made a decision, I think it was around 2015, to go to Kiribati. And some of our shareholders said, why are you doing this? The island is sinking. So we said, no, we see opportunities for development here. And I think the record shows, if you look at our annual reports, Kiribati, I think in the last 5 years, has been the fastest growing market for us. Despite its small size, so the opportunities are there. And we shouldn't just discount, markets like Tuvalu, Tonga, and others just because they're small. People still have, objectives, they have ambitions, they have visions of things they want to do. And no one wants to be left behind, especially in the digital economy. We need to find a way to, enable them to meet their aspirations if we can. And, I do think that, yes, while there's assistance required to get some of these over the line, I'm also looking at the next round of investment, because if you don't do anything to develop the markets now, the next time you come around, it's the same problem. And the gap's going to be the same or bigger. Even if we don't close the gap the next time around, if we can get that to be, smaller or even closer to the mark, then it's a lot easier to do the next few ones.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ivan. Very inspiring, I must say. Simon, let's hear from you. Also no stranger to public-private collaboration. What has been Vocus Group's role in this initiative? And in your view, what is important about this model and what's needed for it to succeed?
Thank you, Ursula. I would love to sit here and be altruistic about why Vocus is participating in this. We've got a problem at Vocus where we're actually running out of capacity on our network. We need to put more glass in the ground and glass underwater. So we had a decision to make, particularly on Transpacific capacity, where we were thinking about potentially doing some builds or buying, or the third one was a partnership. And fortunately, Brian came to the party there because the scale and size of this system is absolutely incredible, and the cost per megabit is nothing that we've ever seen. So my shareholders, who are a bank and a pension plan, absolutely loved what this could offer. I think there's lessons there for everyone here that to pick up on what Ivan was saying, that this is a huge opportunity for people to connect to the system, because the economics of it really make a lot of sense for carrier businesses and their customers. So our role really here is basically we needed to get more capacity. We're also acting as a landing partner for Google for some of the Australian landing points. So we really are partnering. They've always been a long time customer of ours, but I think the roles kind of flipped. They're now the supplier, because as a carrier we just can't compete with the scale of these investments.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Simon. So just to add another piece of information to the mix, yesterday there was the first ever ministerial conference on digital inclusion and transformation in Asia and Pacific. It took place in Kazakhstan. It was co-hosted with the UN SCAP, the Regional Economic Commission for Asia and the Pacific, and there were governments from across the Asia-Pacific region there, 30 in total, and they adopted a ministerial declaration called the Astana Ministerial Declaration, and among other things it says, recognises that there's a pressing need to overcome the major impediments that developing countries face in engaging with and accessing new technologies, such as an appropriate enabling environment, sufficient resources, infrastructure, education literacy, capacity, investment, and connectivity. So Rory, I'm going to come back to you and say the major impediments include funding, infrastructure, and funding for infrastructure. So what impact do you think this collaborative model that we've been talking about in this session will have on digital infrastructure investment, particularly for underserved communities where there's still this digital divide we've been hearing about?
Yeah, I mean, capital, it always comes down to capital in many ways, doesn't it? But I see that as an opportunity. And I actually see it as an opportunity where, because of a confluence of events, we're actually at a point where an initiative like this can come to bear, where previously, if we were all trying to operate independently, we wouldn't be able to find the capital or the resources or the capabilities or the political will to be able to solve what is a collective problem. And so I see that actually as a great opportunity for us, and a tremendous sort of point in time in the life cycle of many of these large, call them generational, but sort of multi-decade type investments. And I think the real opportunity is, as we do this and as we demonstrate success through it, it paves the way for more. I love the playbook kind of model that Google has followed in a number of markets. And I think that as we look at the Pacific Islands and we think about this as one model, I think there will be others like this, where you can bring public funding, you can bring commercial interest, you can bring operator expertise, figure out how you mesh those together, and it makes it a much easier case for the capital to be allocated, to find the investment models to do that. So I think it's an opportunity more than a challenge in many ways.
Fantastic. Brian, do you want to come in on this, on the funding piece and how it connects with this new model?
Yeah, I think let's take a case study. So Bill was saying earlier, lots of cables installed in the early 2000s. They're hitting their 25-year end of life. We're at this perfect storm where we have a number of assets that are being retired, and there needs to be a rebuild. So Japan to Australia is one of those. There's a number of cables between Japan and Australia. Some of them are going to be retired soon, and we needed to have a path for replacement. So Google began exploring this space, having discussions with our investment partners and saying, what can we do here? But then we looked at, well, if we tweak the route for this replacement cable slightly, and instead of running it direct Japan, Australia, go from Australia to Fiji to the Marianas to Japan, we can run right past Tuvalu, Solomon, Papua New Guinea, FSM. By the way, I didn't know any of these names 2 years ago. I know them all now. And as Ivan said, run by their front door. Now, Google's a business, Focus is a business, Telstra is a business. We make investments for Google's sake to meet our demand, and others it's for wholesaling or other pieces. And that's where this public partnership came in. So we were running right past Tuvalu. It's the only Pacific Island nation that didn't have a planned submarine cable. And we were able to approach the Australian government and the US government. They brought in Japan and New Zealand and others, and we were able to get almost $40 million in funding to build a branch to Tuvalu. The funding went to Tuvalu. The funding isn't helping Google build a cable. It's taking that private investment and leveraging that investment to connect the unconnected. So we're now in the process right now. I have a team on the ground in Tuvalu as we speak. The one flight a week, one runway, and we'll have a first cable up in early next year. So they'll have their first connection from Tuvalu to Suva in Fiji, where a number of other cables landed. Today, that just doesn't exist. And I think that's where you see this unique opportunity to leverage and create new forms of partnerships between a number of governments, a number of carriers, a number of content providers to really leverage the investments that we need for our business to satisfy the growth, but to slightly tweak them to focus on three objectives. One is reach, reducing the digital divide. The second is reliability. We define that as engineers as extending the mean time between failure. And the third is resilience. Again, the mean time to repair, shortening it. So those are the three objectives that we all agree is important in this initiative. And we follow three principles. One is sustainability. So we measure the watts per bit delivered, and we're really focused on lowering that. The second are local partnerships. How can you team up with the Vodafones and the Digicels and the incumbent providers where Google doesn't have an interest to play in that space, but our partners absolutely can and do, because you have to extend it all the way to the user. And then the third is an open internet. Global shared infrastructure ownership amongst parties and providing universal access to the world's information.
Thanks so much, Brian. Ivan, did you want to add something on the funding side?
Not so much the funding, but I think from what Bill said this morning, and Brian was saying is pleasantly surprised with the cost of energy in Fiji. It's one of the ways to sort of flip this on the other side, because quite often we look at connectivity as the problem and the challenge of its own to be funded. But the discussions with Bill were, well, if you're chasing energy, and our shareholders, the FNPF is in the room, they're looking at doing some additional work with Google on connectivity. Telecom Fiji, our subsidiary, is looking at how through some knowledge transfer from Google and others, they could sort of get into the data center space. But if energy is now the drive of that equation, and there's certain markets like Fiji, Papua New Guinea, where from a renewables perspective, there's quite an untapped market and a lot of resource out there. And with many hyperscalers, the work in AI, I don't see the cost of energy coming down anytime soon, and in the future that's only going to go up. Energy, and I think the second requirement is cooling, essentially water. There's a lot of that in the Pacific. So that's what's driving, I think, future, connectivity is now going to be a consequence of these other drivers. Then I think the funding equation, if you look at it from that perspective, actually becomes a lot easier. And that's one of the things we hope to do in Fiji is to see if we can, get this done. Then if connectivity is just a small piece to getting it done versus the other stuff, then that would be done, that would connect the others up. But the main business driver for us, our shareholders and subsidiaries, is around other things as well.
Exciting. Simon, what about you? Would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think funding is one aspect. The other one, the big role I think governments can play here is around facilitation. So one of the key drivers of cable network development really is the point of landing. That can suck up an enormous amount of time and introduces a lot of risk to these big programs. And it's quite a low-cost thing that individual national governments can do, which would be to maybe package up landing arrangements in each jurisdiction so you're willing to accept this opportunity when it comes past your back door, rather than the other way around. And that might involve pre-surveying landing, pre-permitting, getting all the approvals done in order to enable these large infrastructure developments to divert to particular nations along the way. And I think that's something that governments could do that would not cost a lot of money, that would have an enormous impact on the viability of connecting to this trunk cable.
That's exciting.
Yeah, maybe to that, I think the discussion we had with Ambassador Kevin Rudd yesterday was, his view was, look, the forum is probably a place to getting that done, the Pacific Forum. So I recall in the 1980s, 1990s, telecommunications policy for the region was squarely within the remit of the Pacific Forum. But we've had this wave of re-regulation and liberalization. And then we've had government sort of move away from the telecoms and ICT space. As a result of that, we've had the brain drain. They've lost a lot of resources. So there's not the capacity to getting a lot of that work done. But one of the things we're starting to try to do with the Pacific Islands Telecoms Association is to re-engage with the forum and to bring telecommunications, ICT, and cybersecurity back squarely within their remit and to increase the priority of that. Because we, as industry, I think we do have closer collaboration and dialogue amongst ourselves. And at some point in time, we kind of leave the regulators and governments to one side. It's time to sort of bring them in to say, there's challenges we all need to work together on. And each of us has issues we need to solve. Let's see how we can get this done.
Shifting from funding to another theme which came a lot in our pre-chats, regulation. So Ivan, let's start with you on this. What changes on the regulatory side might be needed in your view to have more of an enabling environment for such large-scale collaboration?
Yeah, look, ideally, I think as Simon has said, across the region, every market we go to, things are very different, the processes are very different. One of the things, look, in an ideal world, you'd sort of have, harmonization across all these markets. But, I do understand there's sovereign issues, there's nuances in each market where you can't sort of, get a one-size-fits-all for each of these markets. But maybe at least from a philosophical point, if we can agree these are the driving principles for what regulation should be doing, and how do we get access, how do we operate in markets, what are the ground rules, around the various regulations and legislation in place. That would sort of smooth for us at least, the entry and operation in each of these markets. There's also, I think, quite a bit of challenge around, because technologies are moving fairly quickly. A lot of regulators in the Pacific, they will admit that they're not equipped to deal with these things. So it's about how do we, assist them to sort of grapple with the issues that they have to deal with and, come with solutions that make sense and work for everyone.
Simon, I know you have some thoughts on this too, and maybe a model to suggest you've seen?
Yeah, in a past life, I worked for the Singaporean government for the regulator there, the IDA. One thing that we used to do really well there, I think, was to have effectively one door in to get a project approved. When we built the Australian-Singapore cable, we needed 26 departmental approvals. Now, if you look at what Google are doing, if you extrapolate that across all the jurisdictions that they're working in, it becomes very, very complicated and cumbersome and time-consuming. So what the IDA did, they basically packaged up all those approvals. They would go and seek that on behalf of the cable proponent, which took a huge amount of, once again, time and risk out of the project. And there was nominated cable landing zones at Tanamera. There were kind of 26 slots for sale. And it was very, very, I think they industrialised the process. Hence why you've got so many cables going into Singapore, because it's just an easy jurisdiction to do business if you're a cable developer.
Thank you. Rory, did you want to add something on the regulatory environment and what you'd like to see maybe?
Yeah, there's probably three dynamics at play in my mind. I think one is, a little bit as my colleagues have talked about, it's a relatively distributed sort of stakeholder group. So lots of different countries, each has its own regulations. Each market will have a varying level of regulatory maturity. There will be SOEs in some places. There will be a variety. And so figuring out how we reduce the friction in terms of opening that up to look beyond the economics of the existing model to look to the economic benefit of the future. And I think that's a bridge that has to be reached to realize that as we can open up the infrastructure, it'll actually reduce the the cost of connectivity, which allows the end retailers to reduce their cost to get to that $2.50 or $3 ARPU point where we can make it economical. So I think on each country, we have to find a way to reduce the friction. I think second to that, if we pull back quite a bit into some of the broader geopolitics, the role that Team Telecom plays on these large cable systems is increasingly apparent. And so on one hand, there's a very familiar relationship between Quad governments, and as Team Telecom looks at where you start and where you end and what connects to the cable, I think that's increasingly clear. But as we're trying to bolt on to this initiative access to smaller markets that may not necessarily be in that same security corridor, if we want to call it that, figuring out how do we engineer that away and how do we bring our regulators like Team Telecom across on that journey, and thinking about that is the second one. And the third one is our regulatory constructs are not equipped to deal with LEOsats. They're not designed for it, they're not built for it. They figuring out, and this is globally, this is not specific to the Pacific, it is how they use spectrum, how they're taxed, what kind of local service they have to have. And so we're operating still in an old construct that's very well established and defined in terms of the regulatory environment that governs telecommunications. LEOsats are disrupting that, and I think they are competing with us and complementary to us in many ways. But I think the model still has to evolve for us to get to a point of maturity that it is actually truly complementary. And I think we're running into, we're running at the fringes of how that can actually work until we have some at-scale sort of evolution in terms of that regulatory construct. And I think that is the part that we talk a lot about subsea, because we're mostly subsea people and in that digital infrastructure space. But LEOsats are an emerging technology that are complementary. So figuring out how those come together and how we help lead the way in terms of what those regulatory environments should look like, I think it's on us to help propose to governments to make that work.
Brian, I think you wanted to also come in on the regulation, the regulatory environment piece.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful to see some folks from Team Telecom in the room, and we have an opportunity to talk of the real case in points. By the way, as an engineer, I don't know what ARPU is, so I'm going to talk to Rory afterwards to see. But if we think of, again, why is Google doing this, but what are the considerations? US to Australia, right? We have Southern Cross getting ready for retirement. We're rebuilding a cable as a part of this initiative. Google's very interested in Australia, US connectivity, its core, but we're running by we've routed this to run by a bunch of places like Vanuatu or Cook Islands or Niue. Those places don't have cables that touch the US today. So we're applying for a cable that we need for our business, and our partners also need, that, by the way, have dedicated fiber pairs on these systems. And let's say that the intent is that we've taken 2 fiber pairs, and that is used for island connectivity. So any island can connect to the trunk, choose a trunk provider, and have services. There are technological ways that most of you know to protect the trunk and the core asset, whether that's PFE that grounds at the branching unit, so they can't do anything funny to the PFE to mess with the trunk, the power feed equipment, or ROADMs that only drop traffic into those countries that are destined for those ways. But from a regulatory schema, we have a cable that's approved, it's being built, and all of a sudden you're going to add a new unknown country. Well, from a cyber landscape, the less countries and places you connect to, the more secure you are. But for the goodness of connecting the unconnected, these are good things to do. So how do we work with a regulatory environment to come up with accepted ways and preconditions where that you can connect the unconnected, but not put very, very large investments at risk that are core to a number of our businesses? I think that's a path folks from Team Telecom that we want to work with you on, all of us do, and really figure out how we can have the best of both worlds, both minimizing cyber risk and minimizing landscape, but still connecting the unconnected. That's a regulatory change that's really needed.
Thanks so much, Brian. So now I have a really question for all of you, because we've been hearing about some of the opportunities, the challenges. Are there any pitfalls with this model that we need to avoid? How are they being managed? And on the upside, are there any other success factors that we haven't already discussed that we should make sure folks here know about? Who would like to go first?
I'll jump in if you like. I think the greatest risk to this is approaching this in a very ad hoc way. I remember when the Pacific Connect system was announced, Ambassador Kennedy was interviewed in Australia about what she thought of it, and her comment was, "This is a great foundation stone for a new digital infrastructure in the Pacific." The greatest risk to me is that it becomes a missed opportunity for the reasons that we discussed, that countries aren't necessarily in a position to connect to it, and I think Brian's working hard with a number of the governments like Tuvalu to make that happen. I think that's the biggest thing. Once this is gone, it is very, very hard to get vessel time to come back to connect at some point in the future. Our experience is that the big marine vendors really don't get out of bed for 100 million, anything less than 100 million these days. So a small, let's say a $10, $20 million project to connect to the trunk cable is not viable to get vessel time anymore. And that's to me a huge risk going forward, that it's just no one can connect to it. Yeah.
Yeah, Brian.
So this new paradigm shift of public-private carrier partnerships and building infrastructure, it's three groups running at a very different pace. There's sprinters, there's, I think, some ways walkers, maybe backwards sometimes, joggers. But at the end of the day, a ship's coming, cable's getting dropped in the water, and it costs maybe $100,000 a day to run that.
Yeah.
And you have to make decisions at pace and at scale. So I think we've learned to be very, very clear. Here's the dollars, here's the day. Otherwise, the ship has literally sailed. But I think finding the way to have that pace where you can all move together, and it's been a challenge. It's tough, right? Because I think you have two opposite ends of the extreme that you want to bring together to do the right thing. So it's been an interesting adventure, and I think still learning. And no one believed that we would announce Pacific Connect at PTC last year, and already have funding for Tuvalu as a country done, signed, executed across 5 governments, and we have crews on the floor or on the island today digging a ditch, right, putting in the beach manhole. That's an amazing pace that it is possible. But it's really about focused of, here's the priority, this is what we're going to do, and a very small group of decision makers focused on getting things done, and it can work out.
Thanks, Brian. Do you want to add something, Rory?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is actually the level of government interest in getting involved in projects like this. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity. And, you know, again, it's thinking about those parties that move at different speeds. It's also being able to speak in the right language. And so as we look at government's interest, whichever, you know, government that might be, particularly, you know, across the Quad plus a couple of others, it's being able to demonstrate, well, what is the, you know, as commercial operators, how do we translate that into geopolitical outcomes that they can take back to their constituents to advocate to make this recurring, because a one-time project is only so interesting. It is the ability to do more and more of these, to be able to demonstrate the impact that government funding has into projects like this. And I think it's ultimately how we're able to translate those end use cases and the impact on individuals and communities and economies to be able to say, this is what impact that's having. You know, I think, you know, Ambassador Fick spoke earlier just about those different constituents who are looking at connectivity and bridging the digital divide, and then aspects for security. And so we'll have to be able to talk about both of those, but that will take us, you know, require us to be able to, and I say us as operators, to be able to translate, you know, I talk about ARPU, I have to be able to talk about average revenue per user and what we look at from a mobile user, how much they spend. That's shop talk for us. We need to figure out what the shop talk is for our partners, so that we can translate the outcomes that we're helping deliver into things they can take back to their constituents to be able to advocate for the next iteration and the next project to make this really get the flywheel moving. So I think it's an opportunity for us, but I think we have to be very conscious about how we do that. It won't come naturally.
Thanks, Rory. Ivan, did you have anything to add about like kind of risks you see and how they're being managed or need to be managed?
Yeah, look, at the outset, it's great that, when you read the room and all the parties in the room, at a very high level, there's common interest to getting this done. I think the potential, when you dive into the details, and that's where the devil is, right? Very quickly, people will find out that, look, not everyone's going to benefit equally. Some may even have to sacrifice part of their benefits to getting the project done and getting it, off the line. And the risk is, it's at that point sometimes things fail because, many years ago when we didn't have as much cable connectivity in the Pacific, most of the Pacific markets agreed that we should, collaboratively work together to try and, secure satellite connectivity for all of us. And everyone agreed that's the thing to do. And we had numerous discussions with MFET, DFET, and others as well. But when it came to, well, who's now going to sacrifice part of the benefit so Tonga can benefit or the Cook Islands can benefit, we suddenly found ourselves sort of running in different directions. And, there's just that need to, every once in a while, pull everyone back and say, look, we just need to look at the big picture and see how we can get that done. But the opportunities are there. Getting this done means, the ability for the Pacific to be connected, and at least not for the digital divide to get any bigger than it is right now.
Thank you. Now, there were just a couple of other questions which I think we haven't necessarily addressed, but so I'm going to throw them out there, see if anyone wants to pick them up. One was, is this new model actually a return to an old model of club cables or shared satellites? Brian, I think you were maybe going to take that one. Is this old orange juice in new cans? Can such large-scale collaboration happen without a huge tech company? There was another question that was posed. And the third is the evolving role of edge infrastructure and its impact on the future of technology. Maybe, Brian, you want to take the first one, and then let's see who else wants to pick up any of these remaining ones, and then we can say we did our homework.
Yeah, I think on the idea of club cable, and I'm glad you asked that question. First off, this system is much bigger than this room. Folks from AP Telecom are here, which are absolutely critical and on the ground with these islands, educating them, helping them with their regulations. Eric and team, thank you all so much, and critical part. Carriers, OPT in French Polynesia, Fintel in Fiji. From a government standpoint, the State Department's cables program, absolutely incremental, massive to this, have funded branching units for Marshall, Kiribati, FSM, Australia DFAT and their investments in Tuvalu and Vanuatu and PNG, Dataco and PNG, another carrier that has invested and come on board. I think the list just continues to go on and on. New Zealand MFAT, Japan MIC. It's incredible in 2 years how big this club has become. It's exciting and inspiring to see all these folks come together to try to reduce the digital divide. And I think that this public-private carrier partnership actually does work, and I hope it does move into the future. It's not just about everyone having their own fiber pairs and doing what they need, but it's really working together and have a business perspective, but also focusing on the greater good. Which is inspiring for me. There was a second part to the question.
Shared satellites. Or can large-scale collaboration happen without a huge
Can large-scale collaboration, right? It always makes sense to have an anchor tenant investment. If you're going to build a cable and someone's going to consume half of it, right? So in most cases, well, in all cases, these systems are all 16 fiber pairs. Google's taking half, and that's for our own internal demand. And the rest are used for partners, whether it's Vocus that has their own fiber pairs or folks like ATH or Telstra, even the Chilean government who have formed a JV. The Humboldt Cable Company has a fiber pair that they're using and marketing for delivering services for research and education and others. So Yes, having a hyperscaler definitely helps, or really any anchor tenant that's a large consumer and willing to step up capital in the beginning. But it's definitely, this isn't a Google program, and it's not me that's making this successful, it's everyone.
No, and I love that, Brian. I think, those consortium models have changed from a decade ago, where a bunch of operators would come together. And I think the beauty of having hyperscalers in that is their ability to commit based off of internal demand and to front-run capital probably moves at a faster pace than operators who would need to build a book of demand based off of some probability of interest without commitment necessarily. And so I think having hyperscalers as an anchor through that allows some of these projects to move faster, which is great. And so I think the nature of the consortiums has absolutely changed. And it is that I'll get my words straight, but the public, private, and operator components of that, I think no one can do it by themselves. But the nature and the flip of the model in a way actually allows us to move on bigger programs faster than if, as operators, we still need to come together and to build up a book of demand to get through, business cases, to get to SIF, to get to that point. And so I think it's incredibly powerful for us in many ways to have new partners in that discussion, and almost to say we are partners to them in many ways more than the other way around.
Ivan, Simon, did you have any thoughts on these remaining questions?
Yeah, not quite edge in the Pacific. I think in terms of traffic densities and distribution, we're not quite there yet. But related to that is once we get these Pacific markets up and running, Tuvalu, for example, gets to Fiji, their question is, I need to get out of Fiji to get somewhere else, and I need to pay for that as well. So, it's another cost added on. So the potential, I think this is part of the discussion with Google as well, was, markets like French Polynesia, Guam, Fiji, where we're all, have large amounts of interconnect, to look at setting up as internet exchanges and peering points. So, Google's at least coming in to try and get guys like Facebook in, Amazon's and other hyperscalers in there, so that once you get that pairing set up, the amount of traffic you need to transit beyond that point becomes less for other customers that land in Fiji, French Polynesia or Guam, and that really helps the economic equation for them as well.
Did you want to add something, Simon, on this?
Yeah, I'll just close up. I think this is a unique opportunity for the Pacific community. I think they're in a position where they can leverage off what the hyperscalers are doing. I think the potential use of LEOsat to distribute bandwidth out to remote communities is also extremely profound. But underlying all that, I think, is their desire to retain some kind of sovereignty over their telecom systems. And my own discussions with some parties is that they feel that might be at risk. There's a huge amount of third-party funding coming in from large governments. So I think that's something that could actually get lost in the wash that I think we need to keep an eye on.
Thank you so much, Simon. So to close us out, one final message, one takeaway for folks here. Brian, we maybe start with you. What do you really think? What's the key message you want people to take away from the session?
Yeah, I think that, the theme of Pacific Connect and the focus is really open, neutral, and sustainable connectivity, and doing this in a new model between public, private, and carrier can work.
Rory, what about you? Final message, takeaway.
Yeah, public, private, and the partnership part. I think that open collaboration, to Brian's point, and sort of learning how to work with new partners, you get out of it what you put into it. And so the more that we are transparent and open and sort of, really get to engage at a deep level will allow these projects to be successful.
Thank you. Simon?
The key calling card for me really is treat this as a master plan opportunity. So rather than have ad hoc developments, I think have a very, very coordinated view about how the jurisdictions can all collaborate together to build on this foundation.
Fantastic. And Ivan, you have the last word. We're going to close with you. So
yeah, I guess it's the closest to me. I guess being in the Pacific, we're always the ones that are the most isolated, with the least amount of infrastructure and the highest cost to getting connected. But look, as I said, people's aspirations are the same regardless of where you are. And, the hope is something like this coming to fruition would make a really huge impact in that. And, once that gets up, I'd like to see the Pacific see this as a new dawn, a new opportunity for us to move up.
Great point on which to end. And we can see maybe in the future a transition from small island developing states to connected big ocean developing states in the Pacific. So please join me in thanking our terrific panelists. And I believe if folks have questions that they can be sent in, and that there's a mechanism this afternoon to address them. So thank you all for your attention as well. We'll finish it there.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.